All right, guys. For those of you who have seen me do some of this stuff before, what you know is that I don't read off of notes. I just like to talk extemporaneously, if I said that word right. But there's a lot of stuff here, so I feel like I need to say I'm not going to be my normal, like, bubbly, go across the stage self. I'm still going to be bubbly, but I'm going to do a lot of reading because there's a lot of information that I want to be clear about. So I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to try to get through the front end, which is a little bit of the setup, a little bit faster than I would have normally. If you guys have questions, I'm going to be here for today and tomorrow, and I'd love to go into more detail. But I want to get to the good stuff as fast as possible, especially with us being delayed 2 hours. So yes, I'm Chris Heivly, and I've done a lot of crap. I just think it's kind of ADD but I think the important part that for those of you who I didn't have a chance to meet, who may be meeting me for the first time, what I want to share with you is that I've been an entrepreneur, I've been an investor, I've built an accelerator in my town of Raleigh-Durham over the last 6 or 7 years, making 42 investments. And while doing that in my community and working with people that are now kind of my friends and partners in this venture at Techstars, I've become kind of this community builder. As most of you know, you don't go to school for this, and it's not like, you know, we can get certified in any of this, maybe not yet. This is still a very new, kind of nascent type of role. And so, and as Raghav said, we've been spending, this year, we've launched this kind of pilot program to work with 5 communities around the world, including Lima, Peru, and Richmond, Virginia, and Cleveland. Let me run through the Techstars stuff. For those of you who aren't familiar, Techstars, we're a worldwide network that helps entrepreneurs succeed. I like to put these numbers up because they still blow me away. Like you, I've spent more time admiring and following them from afar than being kind of under the tent like I have been this year. But the platform and the impact worldwide and the collective experiences that I can take from all of these actions and companies we work with, like Josh at Data Nerds, et cetera, is pretty incredible. Over 1,000 startup weekends this year, by the way. Think about that if you're familiar with a startup weekend. 1,000, about 48 startup weeks in Startup Digest. The first accelerator company to go public, SendGrid, just a couple weeks ago. Y Combinator, Techstars, 500 startups, all of them, first company to go public. So it's a heck of a platform. Through all those experiences and thoughts and kind of activities, we are very passionate, and I think most of the people in this room probably share that, or you probably wouldn't be in this room, that having a startup community and ecosystem is critical for every metropolitan area. The direct, and as importantly, the indirect benefits to corporations and companies and talent and people, all of this conspires together. This is part of the driver. It doesn't have to be it can't be the entire community, but having a robust ecosystem creates, especially kind of with millennials moving into urban areas, like all of this stuff is kind of spinning together, and it's why we launched this business this year. You know, the risk is, and you guys have been doing it for about 5 years or maybe longer, but the risk is for those communities who don't do it, I think they'll be left behind. So this is kind of our why, what we believe. What we observe in most community, startup community leaders, entrepreneurial community leaders, I'll use those words interchangeably, what we understand is that the first thing people do, including people in this room, including people like myself, in Raleigh-Durham, my home, is we start to think about what are all the pieces, the activities that I call these activities that we need to start going. We need a co-working space. We need an accelerator. We need a fund. We need an angel fund. We need angel investment. We need entrepreneurs. We have to run a startup weekend, right? We start doing kind of all of these things as kind of, and we start building on that over time. But what I'm going to tell you is that we kind of miss, and most communities start to miss, I think, a more fundamental and more important piece. And I'm most familiar with Boulder and Durham, in Raleigh-Durham. And what I'm going to tell you is that if you leave just the idea of we just need more activity as the driver, you're going to hit a plateau, or the potential can be capped. It's not unlike building a company that evolves over time and that has to do pivots and changes and use new tactics as you continue to mature. What I say is that the tactics that these two guys use to build their company from 0 to 1 are going to be much different than the tactics they're going to use to go from 5 to 10 or 5 to 20. Startup communities are no different. And so what we've done is kind of start to, oh, that looks pretty. This is what happens when you do it on the plane. So, not the whole slide, just the build slide. I get a pass? So what we found is that the activities are just one piece, and actually the more important part of startup communities are what we call kind of the attitudes. And at Techstars, we've labeled a term called Give First, and if you don't know what that means, ask someone. Ask Josh about it, who's been through the Boulder program. But it's really simple. It is that each one of us as individuals sign up to give without any expectation of getting something in return. Now, this is my first time I'm kind of planting that seed. So for those of you who think we're going to start rubbing crystals together and, I'm going to start talking about the universe, I get it. It's a little squishy. But I have seen it firsthand where the right attitudes as individuals collectively grow up to do something bigger. So we're going to talk about that. All-inclusive, network over hierarchy. Once you have a great foundation, then you can start figuring out all the people, especially to this all-inclusive, that can help play a role in the community. A lot of times in the early stages of community building, we're only working with maybe entrepreneurs and investors. And then we layer on maybe an organization like AO. But it actually takes much more people, especially as you begin to scale. And we have to make sure that everyone's welcome into this community because everyone has a role to play, even government, who I abhor, typically, but learning to love. And then after those, then we can figure out what are the right activities that our community needs to best serve the entrepreneurs, all right? So think about those 3 building blocks and the very cute alliteration of attitudes, actors, and activities. There's a couple of you in the room that are my age who have built business muscles and have been around organizations, and where our training and our formative years back before some of you were born kind of made us kind of approach life and business life with a certain idea in mind. What I want to do very quickly is talk about 3 truths of many that we have and talk about and kind of plant these as seeds for you guys to think about going forward. First of all, startup community building is not like economic development. In fact, it's almost 180 degrees different. Let's think about economic development today. Structure, planning, budgets, selling, recruiting. Now, raise your hand if you're an entrepreneur in the room. How much do you like structure, planning, budgets, right? In fact, we run the opposite direction. And this is where a lot of places break down, is we have people trying to kind of over-structure or over-plan or over-coordinate kind of how to build a startup community. It's like kind of laws of physics. It's completely opposite. So seed planted. Secondly, and the notes go. My partner Brad wrote a book about 5 years ago called Startup Communities. It's become a Bible for many people who are passionate and motivated to be involved in kind of community building. And if I didn't realize that 5 years ago when I got the book and bought hundreds of copies and passed them out to friends and people like yourselves and places all over the world, I know it this year because every single one of the pilot companies and the 55 communities I've talked to around the world this year all are inbound leads from people who have read Brad's book and say, but please help. One of the things we've seen over the last 5 years is too many of us, including me in the early days, looked at that book as kind of a playbook. If we just do what they did in Boulder, we'll have the same result. And it turns out it's not a playbook. And it turns out that most of us actually miss the piece that we talked about before, which is about the attitudes. We go right to the activities, and we just try to replicate them. So the idea here in this truth is that the reason that I believe I am here, and the reason that you all wanted me and Techstars here, is that it's more like a recipe, and it has to be custom built. The assets and the things that you all have to put in play here in the Okanagan. By the way, I'll use Kelowna and Okanagan interchangeably, but I mean kind of the region. The assets that you have here, we got to figure out how they work culturally, right? With the amount of money that's around, the kind of entrepreneurs that we have. That's more like a recipe. Maybe there's principles like a chef would use, basic cooking principles, but we need to figure out what the Okanagan's recipe is and not just run the Boulder playbook. And lastly, if you didn't know already, like building a company, we have to measure progress in years. There's no shortcuts. Just ask every community 10 years ago that relabeled themselves as Silicon Beach or Silicon Salt Flats. I went through and searched all these. There's amazing. Silicon something. You can't market yourself. Though marketing, and we're going to talk about storytelling a little bit later, can be a component. It can't be the whole thing, right? It can't be just the sizzle and with no steak. So we got to measure this progress in years. Which means when you think about, and I talk about kind of creating, augmenting, moving kind of behavior and attitudes and a new approach or a slightly different approach to how we look at things, you may not see the benefit tomorrow. But I can promise you, and I've witnessed this firsthand in a number of communities now, that you can see it over time. You can see the impact over time.
That's where
Silicon Vineyard. Seriously? Did someone do that?
Someone did that.
Yeah. They're not here, are they?
I don't know.
Was it Jeff Keane?
He's here. He is here.
I saw him.
It was not Jeff.
All right. So in order for us to think about how we can proactively go into communities like this and help, we needed to take kind of all of our collective thinking, take Startup Communities, the book, now 5 years old, needing an update, hopefully maybe being written this year. We needed to kind of figure out new best practices and figure out a way that we kind of organize this so that we can share those thoughts with people like yourselves and then figure out kind of where the wins and the gaps and the challenges were. So we built a model. And it's kind of crude and it's like an MVP. But it's something that we've used and we're starting to harden up. And so this model is really ugly. Don't laugh at the graphic, or just snicker. Just don't laugh at the graphics. Because this is an MVP. This is built on PowerPoint and Excel. And so this is me. All right, so there it is. There's our model. Well, there's a little bit more. But it's really important. And here's what most places start to forget. No entrepreneurs, no entrepreneurial community. The rest of us are here, if we're not an entrepreneur, to serve entrepreneurs. Plain and simple. No entrepreneurs, no entrepreneurial community. You'd be amazed how many places forget that. Not here, of course. No, you guys are in pretty good shape. But especially people that work for sometimes cities, economic development, maybe organizations not unlike AOO, forget that are here to serve, forget that the entrepreneur is the center of the universe. Now, based on that, we then add the culture of the community, and I talked about that, and that's that over-encompassing thing about attitudes and values and how do we interact. We're going to do a really big deep dive into that, but there's 4 other themes that we have identified, and those 4 themes are capital, talent, density, and institutional support, and for the most part, density we refer to as kind of like geographic density, okay? And we'll kind of blow those up in a little bit. And then when you have those kind of themes, then we want to figure out and make sure that all of the potential actors that can play a role have a role to play, and there's a way for them to get in. I told you it was sexy. Those themes are actually kind of the roll-up of about 28 to 30 ever-changing kind of ideas of factors or conditions that we look at. And when I interviewed the 48 people, I believe, here directly, by the way, 48 meetings, but some of them were with multiple people, so we probably touched about 80 to 100 people. These are some examples of the 28 to 30 things that we're looking for. Do everyone exhibits give first mentality? Do they have ways to activate new talent and bring that into the community? Again, this is a model. And then over on the right-hand side, what we've done is outline 7 levels of maturity in terms of community. So some of you are asking to yourself right now, why 7? 3 felt like too few, 10 felt like too many, I don't know. Like I said, this is a model. We needed a framework from which I could go into communities like this and kind of start to figure out kind of where you're at. Not from a competitive or a comparative sense per se, but from figuring out what do communities look like when they're kind of at this stage, and what are the things they do to go to the next stage. And if I can find that out over a bunch of communities, then I can be even more kind of loaded and armed to help each community say, hey, this is kind of the next thing that's going to happen with you guys. You follow that? It's pretty, isn't it? Yes, so we have actually, if you think about 28 to 30 conditions rolling up to 5 themes, 7 levels, every one of those cells has a description, and we roll those up into kind of 7 levels of maturity. And this is just a way for us to kind of do a little bit of indexing, not for comparative sense. By the way, I will be sharing this with the AO team, and anybody who's interested can get a copy of this at the end. So now we had a model, then we had to figure out how we were going to help. So the way we're going to help is we're going to do a consulting arrangement. Now, by the way, as an entrepreneur, it's still, I'm having problems with the consulting word. I get it, right? I don't want to be that consultant, but you'll see peppered through this presentation that I'll use the word we, because I'm now in. You guys got me. So we'll try to make it as kind of least consultant-y as possible. So the idea is, all right, well, what do we need to do? I need to go talk to as many people as possible. Let's do this inventory. As Raghav said, I did that late August, early September, spent about 10 days here, I think. 7 or 8, some of you were part of that, 7 or 8 meetings a day, a couple nighttime, went to Penticton, went to, see how that rolled off my tongue? Went to Vernon as well. You're welcome. So a few thoughts about this. So I've done the assessment, and now we're doing the readout, the roadmap, kind of use those interchangeably. Here's the thing. We have years of experience and a ton of observations. We're not going to get everything right, because this isn't perfect. This isn't a playbook, right? It's a recipe. So this really what we're trying to do. This is the first time we're going to start building a feedback loop. And though technically the end of my contract ends when I deliver this, as Raghav and I just talked about, I'm in. You guys got me forever and ever. And I assume that if any one of you have an idea or a thought or a question, I'm here. At the end, I'll have my email, and I assume that you guys will take advantage of that if needed. So this is a relationship that we're building. That being said, I also brought a team together. So, these are some of the best thought leaders. Brad, who's written Startup Communities. Ian next to him, who's helping write Startup Communities V2, and is a really good kind of economic development, behavioral economist, and especially around communities. He and I spend lots of time together. Nicole, David Cohen at Techstars, lots of people to bring to bear. What I do when I grab all this stuff is I head back to Boulder, and through email and video and in meetings is we kind of look at all this stuff and say, all right, what would we do given all of these characteristics? So it's a good teamwork. So let's get to the assessment. Mentioned the 48 interviews, primarily here and upstairs. Like I said, I did visit Penticton and Vernon. We did a few dinners. What would I say? Clearly really strong interest, motivated, across the board. I think we did a really good representation of those actors around the circle, and a lot of motivated actors to work with. So I'm really, really encouraged. Obviously, there's clear opportunities for expanding on the work that's already been done over the last 5, 7, 10 years, wherever you want to start the clock. But this is never done, is it? Right? It's like growing a company. There's always a new set of challenges. So the following is a set of observations, and we're going to dig into those 5 key themes. And so here's kind of where I put you guys. Your guys are kind of right at the top of 3. Let me read this out loud. There are active high-growth startups, as well as a set of leaders in the community who are taking a kind of a long-term view. Relatively high number of startups are being formed, and investments are being made. Congratulations, Josh. There are multiple events per month that kind of convene and bring people together, and everyone who has a modest interest are at least aware of these events. In order to best understand where we go from here, on the right side of the screen are a few of the elements of what we see in kind of the next kind of levels of maturity. And a couple things, I'll let you read it, I'm not going to read that, but I think the biggest thing is opening up the top of the pipeline in terms of more first-time founder, kind of, I've just launched or started my efforts in the last couple months, that kind of just getting started entrepreneur. We need to kind of open up that top of the pipeline, and we need to see, kind of more in the hundreds, not necessarily in 100 or so. We're going to talk about VA Angels today. I'm really excited to have Grant kind of, kickstarting that and kind of maybe trying to reform that or re-kickstarting that, however. So that's a challenge. And, in more mature communities, there's multiple angel groups. And that's where I would like to see this place go over the next couple of years, that there's multiple places. Obviously, not every entrepreneur should get funding. This is still very Darwinian, right? This isn't like, Little League hockey. I changed that from baseball, did you see that? Where everyone gets a trophy, right? But if we're gonna expand the top, we're gonna need more capital. What I'm not concerned about is putting, a $25 or $75 million venture fund in here. We'll worry about that 4, 3 years from now. The other thing I'll mention is corporate partners, which I think is a really awesome opportunity for the areas to start bringing corporations closer to the fold. We'll do a big deep dive into that. When we scorecard this out, so here's those 7 levels of maturity. Here are those 5 themes. Here's, the numbers really don't mean anything. They're only a way for me to kind of judge and kind of benchmark y'all. I think a year from now, when I have 15 or 20 of these under my belt, and I start sharing this, like you guys can see, all right, what's Boulder doing, or what's Cleveland doing that we're not doing, or what can we learn from them, and they learn from you. So I really wanted to find out kind of where the gaps and the holes were. So obviously, kind of talent creation is the area of that I'd like to focus on. Because I'm a data visualization person, hence the geography thing, I built this really cool little spider chart. For those of you who visited Boulder, kind of here's where the 5 themes stick. Capital is almost always a trailing indicator, so let's not focus on capital. What I tell people is that there's 5 key themes to community building. In order of importance: culture, density, talent, capital, and institutional support, and in most places they reverse that. They start with institutional support, they build organizations, they get the government or the city involved, and then they start throwing capital at stuff. Well, I can tell you, money thrown at shit, it's still shit, right? And in fact, it's not just, it didn't work. It's like, they don't know what they're doing, right? And it ends up becoming a negative thing, especially when smart capital starts to look at companies that people threw shitty capital at, right? So this doesn't worry me, right? Doesn't worry me at all. Obviously, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about culture. How are we doing so far? Everyone staying awake?
Oh, yeah.
You have to go to the bathroom? I had to, sorry.
I want to stay.
I understand. So let's do a deep dive. So we're going to get into some really, really kind of detailed stuff. I've borrowed a phrase from Foundry Group, Brad's venture group, and kind of twisted their kind of internal operating phrase, and I've kind of stolen that. My job here today is to share constructive and honest feedback and deliver it kindly. Some of you might feel a little uncomfortable because I'm going to call out some things that you are individually or organizationally involved in, and my hope is that we can use it as a place to leap forward. So let's talk about culture. On the right-hand side are some of the kind of factors and conditions that we're looking at. I'll give you a second to kind of look through that, and now I got pages of notes, so this is where the reading really kicks in. I feel like there's about 50 to 75 kind of real true startups, one or more founders, working full-time, and actively working their idea and company. Maybe that gets to 100, and maybe there's another 25 kind of still working in their basements who aren't kind of part of the ecosystem yet. And maybe I'm off by another 20%, but let's call it kind of 75 to 100. Not referring to contractors, freelancers, or kind of Main Street mom and pop businesses. In terms of network size, they're almost all connected primarily through AO and are generally aware of all the activities in the region. That's great news. In terms of network, I think there's kind of a minimum number of natural, not organized mentors. I think it's the natural DNA of an entrepreneur to give back and want to help others. And there's some of that happening kind of outside of AO or outside of kind of organized, but it's kind of at a minimum. And I always think of things, I'm going to talk about network a lot, so I'm going to think about physically nodes and links and how people are connected. Being that you guys are a little bit of a geographic island, as proven today with my flight arrangements, it's incumbent on everyone to help grow and diversify this thing I call the startup network. The overall connectedness has room for improvement. It is a task never completed. I observe some silos starting to develop among various niche groups. This is a natural phenomena that we see as communities start to grow, is pieces start to splinter as people kind of double down on the things that they're most interested in or can do. Unfortunately, it becomes imperative that we recognize that and make sure those things don't drift too far apart. Because in the disconnectedness of various clusters comes, as we all know, in the void of communication and information, we frequently put bad shit in there, right? We start to assume different thoughts, and I'll give you a few examples. I'm talking about groups like the old guard here, maybe some of the Club Penguin guys, Collab and AO, and a group of relatively new founders who may not be aware of even some of the work that's been done 5 to 7 years ago. As an example, it didn't appear to me that there was kind of a regular kind of communication or connection between the groups over at Collab who do a whole lot of good shit and AO. And I know that we pimp each other's calendar stuff out, but that's like the minimum. I'm talking about sitting down and figuring out, all right, what's next? How do we kind of make sure our groups are connected to each other seamlessly and frictionlessly? Some of these, each one of those two groups, as just an example, put on events, but it seems like different groups only attend certain ones of those. So there's kind of a clustering starting to form. Another example I observed is that there's kind of super nodes. These are people that are extremely well connected, but that there seems to be a little bit of hesitation in those super nodes or super connectors to kind of expose their network to others. Anytime you build friction into the network is you slow things down. What I'll tell you is that as an entrepreneur, my job is to figure out how to gather all the resources necessary when I need them to go execute my plan. And anytime there's friction in between of that, I put at risk my company. Great communities support entrepreneurs by connecting them to the things they need when they need them. Anytime there's friction in that, we slow that and we put entrepreneurs at risk. As a community, what do we want? We want more entrepreneurs to be successful quicker, right? So that success breeds success. If you are using or encapsulating a give first mentality, then you should expose your network to someone when they need it. Now, just because I know the mayor, who just walked in, by the way, doesn't mean that I'm going to make introductions to every one of you to the mayor, because sometimes it makes sense and sometimes it doesn't. But if it makes sense, or if I say, you know what, you two should know each other, then make the introduction and leave it up to them to figure out how to make that work and whether that's appropriate. Anytime you put judgment and curation into that, you're creating friction. And anybody who's been out to the valley knows, man, there's no friction, right? You can get to anything you want very, very quickly. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about, network friction. In terms of events, I believe AO produced about 140 events last year. Think about that for a second. So here's the thing, and I've shared this with them. We don't need more events. We probably need some different events. We probably need to up the quality events. That tactic, in terms of putting as many ways possible for people to connect, was a really good kind of 1 to 3 activity. But now we need to get a little bit smarter and scale this. If you're sitting here and you have a need, or you see a gap or a void, and you want to fill it, stand up, share the thought, and figure out who else has this problem. That new leadership kind of thing is how this thing's going to scale. And lastly, I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about storytelling. Every growing community needs to share their wins, their challenges, the stories of both. Things like Unplugged, where you put an entrepreneur up and they talk about their experience, is a great way. And have them talking about how shitty the journey is, how sometimes you can't imagine doing it tomorrow, and then 3 days later, you've had the biggest win of your life, right? Sharing those things is really positive. In mature communities, entrepreneur, influencer leaders do this through speaking, blogging, writing books, doing social media. I don't see much of that happening here. If it's not on AO's blog, no one's telling a story, no one's telling your own thing, okay? Entrepreneurs love other entrepreneurs. They want to hear from them, they want to hear their journey, they want to connect with them, they want to follow them. We all follow certain people in social media on the business side, not necessarily on the friend side, right? We follow those people because there's something they have that we want to get from them. We want to be in their orbit. The next phase of this region is we need to have some of these influencer leader entrepreneurs kind of starting to tell the story. Not just their own story, but the story of the region. That will only encourage more entrepreneurship. There's some stuff that's happened. There's the Slack channel, which seems to be up and down. There was a Facebook group at times. Like, good starts. Okay, let's kind of maybe take a step back. Well, I'll hold the recommendations in a second. Storytelling is as old as Jeff Keane. It's been around a long, long time. It works. It works. Even writing that, I started laughing. All right, so recommendations. Oh, something printed out of whack here. Give me a second here. We double printed something. I don't have my notes here, so we're going to do it on the fly. It's all right. I mean, I wrote it, so I should be able to know it. All right, so here's the other funny thing other than the little stab at Jeff. So, at least it was funny when I wrote it. So, I know we're Canadian. See, I already made myself Canadian. And what that means is kind of, we had this like humble, kind of like, we don't crow, right? We're not big, we don't go out. But I gotta tell you guys, as part of storytelling, you can crow in a humble nature, right? And there's a thing about success breeds success and wins breed wins. Every single one of you is traveling, Vancouver, Toronto, Seattle, even in, Penticton or Vernon or at the university. I'm not telling you have to spin this, but I see this like, well, we're just Kelowna. I'm telling you, I think I have told your story more than you guys have told your story around the country this year. My first time I was here was November, December of 2015. I've consistently used this phrase: this place punches way above its playing weight. Right? But no one here talks about that. And not that it gets bitchy, but it just gets kind of like, eh. But I gotta tell you, like, success breeds success. Tell the frickin' story. Tell these two guys, or, and they just happen to be up front, right? So I'm picking on them, but like, and you don't have to be like, oh my God, it's the most amazing thing in the world that Josh raised money. But it's like, hey, we got another company that raised some money, that got exposure down to North America. The double-sided version. Just see if I missed anything. So, tell the darn story. Be proud of it, right? Everyone. Every single person you're talking to is a potential lead in this. Yeah, see if I can do two things at the same time. I must have screwed something up. So I'd love to see a lot more storytelling. It can be kind of organized and platform, right? There's, it could be through AO. I'd like to see stuff. We'll get to the second recommendation. Not everything has to be through AO. Someone, wants to redo this Facebook group or get everyone involved in it. If that's the right vehicle to start telling stories and sharing what's happening, like, I think some of you be amazed at all the good things that are happening, but you're just not aware because we're all heads down. We need a way to kind of organize that. And I'd love someone in this room or someone not in this room to stand up and say, you know what? When I decide what I'm going to do with my 5% of my give back time, my 2 to 3 hours a week that I'm going to give back to the community, what is that one thing? Maybe this is it. Maybe I'll be the one that helps curate lots of stories. I got tons of ideas, things that I've done in my community, things I've done through Techstars, like Startup Digest as a platform. But you know what? We need more people, leadership stepping up to do that. I don't want it to hide kind of the not so positive stories. Let's recognize them. Let's share those, journeys that are difficult, frustrations in fundraising. Yeah, you can share those, but let's make sure we're always telling the good part of the story too, right? I firmly believe with every fiber of my soul that great entrepreneurship is a team sport, not a solo sport. As part of that, you got to ask. If you don't ask for help, if you don't ask the network to find things that you can do to gather those resources faster, then shame on you. So there's two parts to that. There's the ask and there's the give, right? So I talked about everyone saying, I'm going to give first, and we'll go through a few of those kind of tips and tricks. For instance, I probably spend a half an hour every day introducing people. Just because I met two people, I'm like, yeah, I should introduce those two people. They should know each other. They're at a certain phase that this is the next thing they're going to need. I should put them together. Let me ask you this question. When someone asks you to, you have a coffee with someone and someone asks you to introduce them, do you ask that person for permission? Because that's network friction. Or do you just say, I do it? I want you all just to do it. If there's one thing you can take away today, by the way, this doesn't cost any money. We don't need any money from the city or from AO or the state to do this. If the network works, great, you'll just make that introduction. And it's up to those two people what to do with it. I just thought you two people should meet. Every time someone sends me an email and says, hey, do you mind if I introduce you to this person? I said, listen, I trust your judgment. You want to introduce them, but don't ever ask me that again. I'm leaving that totally up to you. And by the way, no filter. Introduce as many people as you want, as you think are appropriate. I'll deal with the influx. That's an example of building a really great network. Imagine all the nodes that start getting added to that as you start to do that. Imagine all the potential in that network when you can, within minutes, get 2 hops away and get access to somebody or something that you need to solve a problem today. The last 5 years has been about a lot of activity taking place and AO coordinating that for mentorship, for access, for the network. But the next 5 years can't be just that leadership team. It has to be individuals. The cool thing about community is you don't apply for the job, maybe a little bit of AO, but you don't really apply for the job. There's a role for anybody to play, right? Each one of you in the job you do can be a leader if there's something that you are passionate about that you want to get organized. So stand up and say, and work the network and say, I think this thing would be interesting, who's in, and go make that happen. Make that your thing. We need lots of leaders, not just a handful. You got it? I love what's happened in AO, and I'm going to share some things that I've shared with them already, which is that it's time for them to kind of scale, in my opinion, one man's opinion, our opinion, start scaling. One of the things I heard through from multiple people is that, where do entrepreneurs? Oh, they have to go to AO. Well, guess what? That's just one door into the entrepreneurial room. As a technically more technical white guy, there's a door that makes sense for me. And that's the typical door that most entrepreneurs walk through. But for this community to grow and add more entrepreneurs, as a 25-year-old woman who's not technical, I may not like the door that works for me. So it's up, and it shouldn't be one organization's responsibility to create all the doors and windows into the room. So if you're a 25-year-old woman who codes, I want to know about your geek squad that you're putting together, or your women's tech meetup. And what I want to do is I want that person who wants to organize that reach out to AO or reach out to the people in this room and go, who's in and who should be in? And Corey introduces his, one of the people that works in his group and says, you know what, she would love to be part of that group. And then he's out. And Andrew Aragua may say, you know what, this is a great idea. How about we give you $250 for your first dinner and you figure out how to organize it. And by the way, I'll pimp out our email list to see who else is, but you run it, it's yours. That enabling support role is where I think I'd like to see AO start to migrate to. Because what's happened is they've done such a fantastic job of executing 140 frickin' events a year that many of you have started to overly rely on them, and that this is the only door or window into the community. And we're all smart enough to know that regardless of talent or intention, that has a limit of what can happen in the community. Kind of a victim of their own success. If I can borrow a sports metaphor, I lived in Chicago for 10 years during the Michael Jordan years. Now, I'm not a big basketball fan, but I'm a sports fan, and I like sometimes the idea of how sports can be a metaphor for a lot of things. And what people who are in the know will talk about is when the Chicago Bulls got great, is when Michael Jordan figured out how to support the rest of his teammates, how to put them in a position of success, and how he could take a lesser role and distribute the power among five, as opposed to just only relying on his talent to win games. Because sometimes you can only do so much. That's kind of where I think AO is today, is say like, all right, I want you to figure out how to be a fantastic asset to the community, but to start enabling the next set of leaders. Talked about storytelling. Who's going to step up? I like to give examples from my own life, not because I think well of myself. I've learned from others. When I was sitting in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina, and we started building our accelerator and things started working, we're about 2 years in. We went and did analysis of where all the applications were coming, where the people were coming, our entrepreneurs were coming from, and where the best ones that we selected and invested in. And it turns out that most of them came from hearing either my partner and I speak somewhere, or they've read my blog, or I'd started writing for Inc. magazine. So we weren't stupid. We said, well, we better do more of that, right? Because the more of that means we can open up the top of the funnel. Storytelling is a key component, right? Not just the content, i.e. more positive spins, and let's talk about some of the good things that are happening, but just people telling what's happening. People were amazed at all the activities that were going around in our area. They didn't know it, right? And that momentum, that positive momentum, everyone wants to be part of, right? And others start to say, well, maybe I can do it. Hell, if she can do it, I can do that too. I know her, right? So lots of ways to help. I'm personally kind of really into this, so if anybody has some ideas or we want to look at existing platforms or new platforms, I'm happy to go deep onto that. We're going to talk about density, and I'll qualify this by saying, as our model has started to shift over the last month or so, we're now kind of boiling it down mostly to just physical density and not talking about numbers of founders or mentors. I'm going to kind of put most of that in the talent side of this, so it's going to be a little bit squishy. What I want to tell you about density is that, guys, this innovation center is amazing. Like, you guys have a central destination, a place that people point to, a physical door for people to go, is this for me? The majority of places that I work with don't have this. There's a little co-working here, there's a guy's office over here, someone's borrowing, this is an amazing place. And what I'm going to tell you, and having witnessed this firsthand, is that there's a flywheel effect when you have a location, a destination, with a certain amount of density. By density, we talk about the number of people in our club, our tribe, compared to the number of professionals in the area. The distinct advantage that this place has is you're a small population, which means it's easier to create density. And we don't know what the number is yet, but there's somewhere like 1 to 7, 1 to 10. When there's one of us to 7 to 10 of just general professionals in the city, what happens is every lunch or bar, or it's easy for people to do events because they're all kind of in the area. That water cooler effect with people bump into each other. Hey, how's it going? Hey, I just heard you raise money. Congratulations. By the way, how'd that work? How'd that happen? Hey, can we have a coffee? Density starts to build on that. So you don't actually have to do much other than make sure people convene in an area. Right now, it's a building. What I'm going to tell you is eventually it has to be a neighborhood, right? Because this building will be filled. At some stage, hopefully, Josh and Corey, their business will be too big to be here. And they'll take a half a building somewhere else. Who's going to fill that in? What's that? Cheers to that. Cheers to that. Just don't buy the building. I hate when entrepreneurs buy buildings. One man's opinion. I have to tell you, all my notes got screwed up. It's probably my bad. Density. We talked a little bit about founders. We need to increase that. Let's talk a little bit about mentors. There's a really good, solid group of mentors. But let me share with you a mistake I made when I look in the mirror. If either one of these guys, again, I'm just picking on them because they're front row and I remember them, came to me and said, listen, I have this problem with customer acquisition. How did you do this at MapQuest? I would say, I am not the right person to answer that question. Because the tactics I used 20 years ago have absolutely no relevance to today. Just because I'm a successful 15-year-old man doesn't mean I know how to help them in terms of customer acquisition. Actually, if I'm a first-time founder or I'm a year into my journey and I have a consumer software product, the best person would be Corey. Because the scars and the lessons he learned over the last 3 or 4 years are much more applicable to me as some super executive that happens to be 50-some years old and, right? So what happens in a lot of areas is we think that with age and experience makes for great mentors. But mentorship comes in lots of flavors and lots of packages. So one of the things I'd love to see here is that, and by the way, every single one of you is an expert in something as compared to somebody else. You have something to offer if you've had that experience. My tip to every entrepreneur is, by the way, if you're talking to someone and you're looking for advice, the first thing you should ask them is, have you ever been through this issue? If the answer is yes, double down. If the answer is no, you can listen to them, but I'm certainly not going to weight that advice equally with someone who's been through this problem. That doesn't mean you blow them off and you're mean. It just means you couch that, right? In terms of kind of community mentorship, everybody here is a potential mentor. If you sit on the network and you have a give first, you're there to help somebody. Maybe it's just make an introduction. Maybe it's just to listen to them. Maybe the thing that you'll share with them is just life journey stuff and evil in your brain. Or how do I acquire multiple customers? Or how do I do pricing, right? From functional little small things to something, right? Everyone has something probably they could help with. So let's not just think of mentorship as 57-year-old, I just turned 58, sorry, 58-year-old, I blew it, old white men, right? We do have something to offer, we don't have everything to offer. So we need to make that bigger. I think I'm just gonna bag the notes. Like they're all out of order. I think I screwed something up, Lexi, I'm sure. All right, so going forward, recommendation. This is not something you have to worry about tomorrow, but in the near term, and I don't know where this sits from when I was here in August, September, but we need to keep using this. You guys should be putting all your meetups here. You guys should convince other people to take space if the space isn't filled yet. We need to point to this destination and let this start to kind of spin and flywheel on that. In a perfect world, if I was playing kind of a Monopoly or kind of, physical space czar, I'd like to take some of the other kind of startup or mid to early stage companies in the area and convince them, if not room here, somewhere close by. I want to make it so that when I go to lunch, I run into people just like me. And some of it may need a little bit of coordination and maybe even a little bit of help from the city. But you guys got to start thinking about what comes next after this building. Because if it's going to continue to grow, what I don't want is another building 3 miles from here. That's like cutting the baby in half. Nobody wins, especially the baby. The idea of density is like a little secret kind of a superpower for small to medium-sized communities, right? So let's make sure, right, we figure out how to be smart. It's the one area that I think a little bit of coordination can be helpful. So start thinking about neighborhood. Talent. By the way, back to the density part, that's just one example of when you play a role in the community, the way that you can exert an amount of leadership is when you put your day job's agenda to the side and you sign up for the agenda of the community. The best way is to say, how does this serve entrepreneurs, not myself, as the banker, the real estate person, whatever role that you play during your day job. If you can effectively put that to the side and sign up for the overall mission of growing this community and helping entrepreneurs, that's the one filter that will help you figure out how you make a decision and how you help. Is that clear? Good. All right, bottom line in talent, we need a lot more founders. We need to be growing this. It seems to be kind of relatively flat with mildly a small uptick over the last 3 years. This is a classic pipeline problem. The good news today is founders come in all shapes and sizes and gender, race, education level, age. These are just a few things. Obviously, most entrepreneurs today are kind of young, white males, average age 30, right? Like, okay, what are we going to do about that? That's just the nature of the beast. However, we can be intentional about making sure in this all-inclusive point of view or attitude of opening up other doors and windows for people who don't fit that. I don't see too many very proactive or intentional activities to do that. It's one thing we have ended up doing really well, by the way, in Durham. Boulder has the same problem. In my community, we have no racial majority. It's 40% black, 40% white, 20% Hispanic, and everything else. And I can tell you, you walk down the streets of Durham, and nobody gives a hoot, whether you're gay, straight, believe in God, don't believe in God, 50 or 20. If you have an entrepreneurial idea, someone's going to listen. There's a place for you, there's a meetup for you, and all of it is in our kind of startup space. That's another place where leadership can jump in, new leadership. I believe every company is a tech company. I'm stealing that line from Mark Andreessen. Thank you. Small little brain fart. Don't worry about that. That doesn't mean that this place has to be just about technology, but obviously technology is a key component in tomorrow's business. The good news is we have 2 colleges in Okanagan College and UBCO, but their CS/engineering programs are pretty early stage. Combined, there's maybe 35 to 50 CS graduates a year. That's good news as it's starting to kind of rise, but we need to scale that significantly. And I know the people I talk to there are trying, but we got to figure out a way to supercharge that. Give you some perspective, in Boulder, Denver, as of 2015, that area produces about 370 computer science graduates a year. In my town of Raleigh-Durham, it's 650. In Corvallis, Oregon, small university town, 270. They have 55,000 people in Corvallis. So that's kind of the scale and the issue we're talking about.
Was that just Boulder or Boulder and Denver?
Yeah, CU is only so much. And by the way, I just use that, bless you, I don't use that just like every tech talent has to be a CS degree. I'm also a big fan of code academies and code schools, and I know something was started here a little while back and maybe didn't materialize, but we got to keep trying to figure out ways to train up people that are interested so that we can fuel, right, the companies in terms of talent. Remember, this is all about talent. The other area that there's a kind of void of is kind of what I call roughly digital marketing. Early stage companies all struggle for customers. How do you find, onboard, and retain customers is the whole cat's meow. There's a couple people here in this first row that know this near and dear to their heart. But there's a talent here, and you can't bank on recruiting talent from Vancouver or Toronto every time. We're gonna have to build that in here. The good news is there's 150 to 300,000, depending on how we want to define the geography of this region. How can we be super smart about building more talent? I'm gonna give you some ideas. I think this is a top priority that goes across all of the actors in the ecosystem. There's a role for everyone to play, from government, obviously, to academic, to specific startups. So it's time, I think, for a major investment. Doesn't actually mean money, it could mean time. But if I was living in this community and I saw what I saw, I'd be figuring out how to find 10 or 15 people and figure out how we're going to supercharge this. This could be your competitive advantage. I've heard about the sunshine tax and all the people who are motivated, who find their way here, love to be here. Well, how do we put that on steroids? How do we make people more aware of what this place has to offer, right? Storytelling is one way you can do that. But I believe there's some things that can be much more intentional. By the way, easier here than if I was sitting in Philadelphia or Toronto, right? That's where scale or size actually can work in your favor. I'd like to start one aspect around founder development. And one of the things that makes me nervous is that when I look at this fantastic organization like AO and the things they do, as more and more companies over the last 5 years have started to scale and mature, they've started to open up programming like RevUp to address some of those needs. But it's still a fairly fixed bucket, which means something has to fall off. And if you view this as a funnel, what I feel like is they're fattening some of the middle of the funnel to address some of those needs, but what they've done is kept the top of the funnel the same. And that may work in the short term, but we all know how pipelines work. And what I'm afraid of is we're going to be sitting here 3 years from now and we're not going to have that many companies. And not only is that number maybe not doubling, but maybe even starts to shrink at top. Every entrepreneur, back to the room metaphor, shouldn't have to go through AO to figure out how to be an entrepreneur. There's lots of ways to do that. Startup weekends are one example. We run one a year. I heard from many of you that we don't need more than one. Well, I don't think you need more than one if it's only for young white males. But what about ones that aren't technically oriented? Or about vineyards, or farming, or ag tech, or some other kind of manufacturing? There's lots of ways to theme these things. All of these, I am sure, I'd love to have the numbers, I'm sure out of every startup weekend, the 1,000 taking place around the world, that out of every one, at least 2 or 3 entrepreneurs decide that's their trigger point to go, I'm going to do it. Los Angeles ran 16 startup weekends last year. Obviously, this isn't LA. It's much better. It's not on fire. You're on fire in a different way. But you get the idea, right? What are the things that we're going to do? By the way, think out of the box. A couple weeks ago, I spent time in, of all places, Wichita, Omaha. Wichita, Kansas, sorry. Hello, is this Pittsburgh? Wichita, Kansas, and there's an organization there that runs throughout the US, 35 cities, I think, that teach high school teachers how to teach entrepreneurship. Why not start in the high schools, right? Why not? Think outside the box. How are you going to supersize the number of founders around here? There's a lot of smart people in this room. We can go figure that out. Computer science graduates. So there's 35 to 50. Do we just hope that they find one of these companies? Every so often, if we're lucky, maybe one of the CS teachers grabs one of the technical founders here and says, come in and guest speak once a semester. That seems like limping in, doesn't it? How do we supercharge this? How do we make sure that every single one of those computer science graduates knows about 25 or 50 of the companies here from the first day they arrive? With a soda and pizza because they can't have beer yet, I don't know, whatever it is, right? But you know what I mean? And that throughout their journey, there's co-ops and internships and paid and, God, if you're going to throw money at something, why don't we throw money at making them, or not making them, encouraging them to stay and work in one of the companies. Imagine the word of mouth if every single one of those students were almost guaranteed a job when they finished. And a job they liked because they spent a semester in some kind of co-op, right? Think out of the box. How are you going to grab those 35 or 50? And I got to tell you, you do a great job of that, that number will be 100 before we know it, right? Because people will come from throughout the whole region saying, this is a place for me. What are you going to do to build a tighter interaction? Not do all the same shit that everyone else does, right? How are you going to be really unique about that and build these interactions with these CS students? It's an engine. We're just priming the engine and trying to be different from everyone else. Like, you guys can do that. Like, it's a lot easier to do it for a city of this size than a city like Philadelphia. Ugh, my hometown. Mentorship. I talked a little bit about the mentorship, that we need to kind of broaden our definition. It doesn't all have to be organized mentorship. It can be ad hoc. I have calendars set up in my calendars for open office hours every week. It's now about an hour to hour and a half. They're 20 minutes each. Anybody can ask for them. Some people here have. And we'll talk about anything you want. You want to talk about life, you want to talk about hockey, you want to talk about your company, you want to talk about a specific problem. I don't filter those. They're on my website. If you email me in, there's an auto response. You sign up, you look at the calendar, I don't have to get involved in it. I never filter those. I have probably sat one-on-one with 3,000 to 4,000 people in the last 5 or 6 years. That's my mentorship. And we'll talk about only one time did someone abuse that and try to sell me insurance. Took about 5 minutes, and I turned around and I said, all right, how are you going to help me? But I'm not going to filter that. I don't want to miss anything. I'm here to serve. That's my give back. Mentorship doesn't have to be super organized, right? I've told some of the, shared this with some of the people here, who are busy running big companies and trying to find ways to stay connected while they're running their company. And I said, decide what you want to do. I decided I could give an hour a week just for that. I put it out publicly. People can find it. It's on my website, on my blog. They pick their 20 minutes. Like, I don't even have and an hour a week. That seems like an easy give, right? But I touch 3 to 4 people a week in doing that. Mentorship doesn't have to be kind of organized and I have to go and I have to knock on AO's door, right? Each one of us can help somebody in something. So I'd like to broaden that definition. I'd like you guys to consider kind of building out this Okanagan network by introducing other people. The thing about this area, it is smaller than most large, it isn't Seattle or LA or New York or even Raleigh-Durham with 2+ million people. Everything that I need is not going to be here. So let's recognize that, step back and say, all right, if I'm having a hardware scaling problem and there's no one here that's ever been through that, then how do I find and get connected to somebody somewhere else? Toronto, Calgary, LA, Chicago. Each one of you probably knows, if I ask that question, there's probably at least 3 of you who could give me somebody that you should talk to, or that they'll find someone to talk to and bend their ear for half an hour, buy them a coffee, whatever it is, right? It doesn't have to be bound by the geographic limits of this area. So I think we need to start building that out. If we do that really effectively and do it better and do it with the right attitudes and stuff, no worries. We've spent a lot of time at Techstars thinking about mentorship. So one of the things I'm going to offer is putting together some video kind of coaching and talk about mentorship. And, I think this is the second thing that I've mentioned today, that how we want to help going forward. How are we doing on time, by the way? We're about an hour in? The quarter after doesn't mean anything to me because I have no idea what time it is. But how are we doing, You
got 45 minutes left.
All right, let's keep it to 15, Heivly says, so we leave time to chat. Capital. Basically, I said this is a lagging indicator, and I'm really kind of okay with what's going on here. It seems like many founders can find that $50,000 to $250,000. There's lots of ways to get that. Some government funds, some angels. I think it's kind of more than good enough right now. Question is if we blow up the number of founders, right? So we're going to work on that in a second. I think there's, Jeff Keene's new fund is a great addition. I think that obviously if you need to go kind of $2 to $5 million raise, you're going to have to go out of this town. By the way, my town of 2 million people, you can't raise 2 to 5 million. You got to go to New York or you got to go to the West Coast. So we're no different, but it's starting. Those outside large West Coast firms in New York are starting to come into my community because of the 10 years of effort. It'll happen. So don't kind of overly freak out and put a lot of time and effort into going we need a $50 million venture fund here. Nah, I think that would actually be throwing good money after bad things. There's a part of me that would love to see a kind of a more traditional, like it's been around forever, but a more traditional accelerator. I think there's some positive elements to that. I might be a little biased, so you can kind of push back on me, but that kind of discipline of multiple people applying, going through a selection, finding great companies, using this community to help them out, finding the first customers, getting them to raise money, making that equity-based, and hopefully with a return. There's something that does to the community subtly and nuanced, and so at some point, I think it would behoove you. I don't think we have to do it tomorrow, but I'd like to see a more traditional accelerator. I mentioned earlier VA Angels. The notion for everyone is that it become a relatively, useless might be a little bit strong, but not a very kind of active group, and wasn't really a place that can serve entrepreneurs, and the number of the members had fallen and all those kinds of things. But I spent a lot of time with Grant, and I've seen a lot of activities. I'm on their mailing list. I'm seeing what's happening. It seems like it's starting to turn back up. All of us can support that. And by the way, there's lots of ways you can support that. If you're an entrepreneur who are way past the angel phase, offer to go spend a dinner with their membership and explain to them what's happening in the world today. Like, support him and support that effort, because an organized angel fund is a great marker, and a well-run one can actually, obviously be really important. Eventually, there might be, we might mature to multiple angel funds, but right now, I'm encouraged by what Grant's doing, and I think there's a role for every one of us to play to help him. Introduce new members to him, take current members, and have coffees with some of the entrepreneurs here, show them what's happening, make them feel comfortable, support, right? Basic support. All right, so to that end, the investor base. I just talked about VA Angels and Grant, helping them tell their story to other people, make introductions. The other one is MetaBridge. Everyone just, and a couple gasps out there. Because I'm going to tell you, there's this kind of like, I always look at the camera before I cuss. There's a bunch of people who are like, the fuck's MetaBridge, right? What the hell does that do for this place? I'm going to tell you what it does. It brings me here. It brings 100 people like me here once a year. Yes, it may not be for too many Kelowna or Okanagan companies, because we haven't matured to some of those levels. But the format, as I see it, is they're bringing awareness to 100 people a year about what the hell's happening here. Steve and Sarah have a vision for what that is, and the goal is to create awareness for the region. And if a couple deals get made, great, but there's now 100 people armed with the story that go back to their places, most of them on the West Coast, and tell the story and build connections. Now, I've given them my time with Steve and Sarah over the last year to say, here's a couple new ideas, because that's what I do. I'm like an idea wanker, but like how to build more interactions. But I know a number of people that I talk to are like, it's not for me, and kind of like, fuck them. Like, we need to stop that, right? I don't, like, if this place is going to mature, like double in size over the next 5 years, maybe that's our goal, there's going to be 10 or 15 of these things that are going to look different, going to be a little bit weird, that aren't all going to be under the umbrella of AO, and some of you guys are going to be running them, and they're going to be positive, because there's lots of doors and windows and things that we're all trying to do something. So I want to ask you, if you're not sure what it is, go ask them. In the void of information, don't assume it's some elite, which is what I heard. It's an elite thing for people who are like, let me just take that shit out of your head right now. I don't know if it's going to have an amazing effect or just a good effect, but I'm going to tell you, I sat there last year and there's 100 really good people, and figuring out Steve and Sarah figured out the right format to get those people engaged. Support it. Even if it's not for you directly, because I'm going to tell you the indirect benefits will be obvious, and have been obvious. This is year 10. You want to do something to help? Even though maybe it's not for you and the invite isn't coming your way, go introduce someone down in the Valley or down in LA or in Seattle that you think would be a good part. Help them bring better people in and more people. it will roll down to you. Everyone get that? Like, that's one of those examples of like, I'm like, why? Why the hate? Not hate's too strong. You know what I mean? Why the, It's hard to do when you don't get it and you don't see it in through your lens. But if this community is going to grow, there's going to be more of these kinds of things. And some of you are going to stand up and be the ones to say, I got an idea. I'm going to spend the time. I think this is a great idea that'll help our community. And even if it's not for me, I'm going to say, great, let me listen. How can I help? At the end of that conversation, I'm going to say, how can I help? Can I use my email list? Can I help you find a speaker? What is it that you can do, that I can do for you? Like, make that your default position, especially in the void of information. Thank you. Just spent 2 weeks in Costa Rica. It's called Salud. How'd I do? Anybody speak Spanish? Let's go. Institutional support. In terms of institutional support, what I include in here is government, colleges, university, and corporations. I think the city's done a great job. It's one of the more active government organizations that I've seen in entrepreneurship just about everywhere. Thanks to the mayor and his team, Robert, others, very involved, very supportive. They vote with their feet. By the way, if you haven't noticed, most of these things don't cost money, right? Most of these things are just standing up and doing things. But they show up, like today. I would like to see the city get a little bit more involved in talent. I think the whole talent thing can be kind of rethought and kind of supersized. And I think that's a great role for government and colleges to get involved in. I had great chats with what I call the Phils. That's Phil Ashman, right? And Phil Barker and team at Okanagan College and UBCO. I'd love to see you guys work even tighter with this community and work on some of the things we just talked about. Be unique. Don't just run the same old playbook. Figure out how you can take your students and get them totally integrated into this community and vice versa. There's a really good opportunity there. Figure out how to do talent matching on steroids. In terms of corporations, I don't think we really are doing much here. There's lots of ways corporations, existing entities, can play a role in the startup ecosystem. First and foremost, there could be mentors in there. Secondly, they can serve as first customers for a lot of the companies. Every entrepreneur struggles with figuring out how to find their first customers. The local corporations are something that every city has that no one else has. No one has these sets of corporations in their city, right? So how do we build a tighter connection? And then obviously money. Smart, forward-thinking executives at large corporations understand that a great startup ecosystem is a source of eventual talent for some of their own needs. You start your company, you run it for a year and a half, it doesn't work out, I need a job. Oh my God, as a corporate guy, I would love to hire someone with a year and a half of failed entrepreneurship under their belt. Right? Like, they're better, more aware than, people coming out of college all naive and, blue sky, right? So let's convince them of that and get better integrated. Under the other category, institutional support, I talk about kind of airline access, not a good subject today. High-speed bandwidth, transportation to key locations. I don't know the city enough, but if there's another pocket of area where there's other entrepreneurs, let's make sure there's a bus line. Let's make sure there's bikes. How do we make sure there's parking? If we're going to double the number of people in this neighborhood, and most of them are going to be younger, like a lot of you, right? I'm not going to pay $15 a day to park my car, right? So those kind of logistical things we can get out in front of. How do we make it frictionless and seamless for entrepreneurs to kind of gather and make sure they have great bandwidth and it always is on, because nothing pisses us off more. By the way, back to the airline stuff. It's hard. I mean, we can't make that happen. But I can tell you, I and a bunch of people put pressure on our city and state government. And sometimes it takes a little bit of money, but we eventually got direct flights to LA, San Francisco. We just added Paris. We already had London. This shit makes a difference. It may not mean anything now, but it's going to mean something in 10 years. So put it on the radar screen. Because the really only direct flight to a major city is Toronto, Vancouver. But we need to talk about things like San Francisco. My last recommendation in this package is let's work on corporations. You all live here. They're neighbors, fathers, brothers, college roommates. They're running companies here. Let's figure out how to get them closer. I don't know what it is. Some corporate day, maybe it's twice a year. Figure out how to bring them here, have an open house, give them free pizza, give them some beer. Beer is the secret to every event. And figure out a way to introduce them to first-time founders to some of the more mature companies. Figure out some funky little speed dating or just fun event. Make it have an agenda, make it not have an agenda. I don't know. But get these corporations and then ask them. Make the ask and pressure them to do something more. So that's 8 of 8. I always like to leave kind of a walk away. My walk away are these 3 things, because everyone can remember 3. Increase the communication, increase the support, increase the trust for each other, and support each other so we enable each one of us to take a larger role in this ecosystem. Make some key investments, talent space, mentorship, angels, and let's start telling the story in a really good and positive way. That's my gig, man. I'm going to leave this up for, these are the 8 recommendations in order of priority. Thanks for waiting around, eating free pizza from Ragwa and Andrew and team. And appreciate you listening, and let's talk about whatever you want to talk about.